Hello guys, welcome to next lecture today we talk about games of the week. This week have been played many games. I mean, since last week have been played many games, obviously. But actually today happened the most important ones, I would say, because the Chessable Masters, basically the finals are, the lineup for finals has been determined. And today was the first set of mini matches, and Magnus Carlsen was playing against Fabiano Caruana, sort of rematch for the clutch international that happened like lately. And Nepomniachtchi played against Vladislav Artemiev. So all of the matches actually ended quite quickly after only 3 games. The match were supposed to consist of 4 games, but they ended quite quickly in 3 games. Magnus and Nepomniachtchi won their respective matches. So I will try to cover today all of those games, but I'm saying it very cautiously because I know it's unrealistic. It's basically not realistic because the time is limited, and there were so many things going on in those games that probably if I cover, let's say 4, I would be very happy. If we cover 5, in one of them will be probably not so, and many of them will be not in really in depth, just really important positions will be, I'll be happy with that. So let's get started with the first game I want to talk about. The first one was a game of Magnus versus Fabiano, and this position I wanted to talk about it first. Basically, this is typical position from some Queen's Gambit decline. This is Carlsbad's pawn structure. White very often tries to create a minority attack, pawn minority attack on the queen side. Sometimes the knights also try to blockade on the b6, c5, b6, c5, a5 squares. Depends, of course, what black is doing and if it is possible. Black, on the other hand, tries to cover the weaknesses, maybe play a5, maybe b6, maybe prepare c5 at some point. Sometimes if white plays b4 to play b5 and then b6, knight c4, things like that. Magnus played queen a3, which is a very interesting move, trying to trade the queens. And if he can trade the queens, I'm not saying that this is a great thing for white, but this is maybe a small step in the right direction, because definitely black will have very little counterplay. So it makes sort of sense for white to trade queens and then basically prepare queenside expansion. So I would still probably take if I were playing with black, because right now I can play a5 as black, and it was the first critical moment of this game. I think that probably Fabiano should have taken play just a5 and tried to play this position, but still after knight d2 I believe white is slightly better. Let's say there are ideas of maybe preparing b4 at some point, and b3 knight c5. It's still slightly better for white, however this was possibly the best what Fabiano could do. Queen 7 is also possible, however I'm not such a big fan of this move. Right now I believe that Magnus could have played either b4 or a5, both with clear advantages. However, he played rook fc1 at first, which is a good move, but I think that I really like Fabiano's response, knight b6. The idea of knight b6 is to play right now move knight c4, and to be honest I still don't understand why he didn't do it, because he could have done it. He went for a completely different approach, but like after knight b6, let's say Magnus played b4, which is typical move as for Carlsbad pawn structure and the kings and the minority attack. Trying to play b5, of course, weaken the pawn structure and so on. And right now Fabiano played move rook a8, which is pretty much not understandable to me. Like I understand one part. I understand that he wanted to prevent b5 and he prepares against b5. But I mean, probably he miscalculated something. Probably Fabiano just miscalculated something. But I just think that knight c4 right now actually could give decent chances for black to equalize. Because let's see what happens. This was actually the most important position in the game, this move right now, knight c4. Because if he plays knight c4, if white tries to play queen b3 or queen a2, b5. Right now, the knight c4 is well supported, and even though we have created our own, weakness on c5, the knight c4 is very strong, and it's not easy to kick it out from there. And basically, it's impossible to kick it out. At best, you can trade it, but what does the trade actually give to white? Nothing special, really. So position probably still slightly better for white, but black's position is not. It's pretty solid. So I don't think Fabiano will have much problems here. Even though maybe his objective is still slightly worse because white can maneuver this its own knight to c5 somehow, try to slowly maneuver and so on. But in general, black is doing quite well. But we need to ask ourselves what to do after bishop takes c4, because bishop takes c4, d takes c4, a5 seemingly is just creating pawn c4 as a chronic weakness, and knight a4, knight c5, or knight a4, knight b6 would be very good for white because pawn c4 will just fall. But here we come again with the sort of what's the most important in chess, which is dynamics. But chess is a very dynamic game, and strategically, white is much better because pawn c4 is just a weakness. Of course, if white doesn't go a5, black may play just b5, and black is just doing great. However, if after a5, b5 is not possible anymore because it will jeopardize the pawn structure. However, in this position, black has very active and dynamic approach to solve these problems and actually even take over the initiative. And the way to do it is bishop takes h3. And maybe this is what both players missed, but when deciding on this position, maybe maybe this is why Fabiano didn't do it, because he didn't consider bishop takes h3 here. But after take, rook takes e3, position becomes extremely tactical, and I believe black should not be any worse here. At least there will be some perpetual or some even maybe attack. For instance, knight d5, I consider it, if f takes e3, queen g3, with at least a perpetual, at least, maybe even more. Both pieces on the queen side are not doing anything, are not supporting the king. So it's unlikely that black is in any trouble here. Possibly, there's at least a draw for black, that's for sure. So if knight d5, rook takes h3, king g2, queen c8, for instance, the queen comes to f5, or maybe rook h5, queen h3, rook h5, rook g5. White king is very weak, and also the spin on third rank is also does make things easier for white. So I just think that it would be great position for black around here. So that's why knight c4 was the best, at least practical attempt, because rook a8 is a very passive move, doesn't bring much, it only prevents b5 idea. But after a5, anyway, after this move, knight c4 right now it doesn't work anymore, because this knight a4 is already very bad. Because pawn on e3 is covered, bishop h3 is not the thing anymore. White goes knight b6 or knight c5, knight d5, pawn c4 just falls. So this is not possible anymore. Knight c8 then, Fabiano played, but after b5, a takes b5, knight takes b5, Magnus anyway managed to conduct this minority pawn attack on the queen side and provoke more weaknesses, which he managed eventually to convert into a win. There was one more interesting moment in this game, or maybe here knight d4 was possible, but anyway, this is equally bad, I think, for black. Anyway, white is just much better here. One important thing here, as in this game, of course, this is slightly better. It's not even slightly better, probably just much better, because it is a great version of this position, of the structure for white, because pawn on c6 is weak, and black doesn't have even a pair of bishops for this. Usually there is at least a pair of bishops, because in many of those lines, white manages to take on f6 in regular, let's say, Carlsbad variation. Bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, and then a4, b5, and so on. In here, it is basically white doesn't have, black doesn't have even this pair of bishops. Knight d5 is coming. All of things like that. So rook a8, bishop f1 happened. All those moves are pretty normal. Definitely white is pushing for a win. And right now, this position, knight takes e6. This is not only move, of course, there is number of other possible moves here for white, but it is called a transformation of the advantage. And from strategic advantage, Magnus decides to go for something more tactical and try to convert it into something else. After f takes d6, knight e5. Suddenly, rook on b6 and knight on d7 are not cooperating quite well. Rook b8, queen a7. Still some issues with black pieces. Knight takes d5, d takes d5. Of course, we cannot take on e5 because on e7 falls. Queen d8. And right now, very nice move by Magnus, bishop e2. Bishop comes to g4. Tactically, there are suddenly lots of problems for black. And here, final mistake, final critical position of this game. Fabiano played king h8, and after this move, bishop g4, position simply collapses. He had to somehow play rook a8, create some pressure on this queen, and try to maybe bring the queen to d7. Let's say queen d4, queen d7. Try to, let's say, be solid. Of course, white was still much better. Maybe queen c5 was a little bit more accurate, but still, this idea of queen d7, trying to keep the position sort of tight together, it would be the best defense. Of course, white is much better. Anyway, pawn on e6 is a weakness. Pawn c6 is a weakness, and white can improve the position in a number of ways. However, this was the best defense because after king h8, bishop g4, position just simply collapsing. Knight g6, f4, and Magnus won a pawn, second pawn, and the game ended in few moves. So this is the first game I want to talk about. I think it went pretty smooth, but I don't know how many we can cover today. I'm trying to keep an eye on the clock because I don't want to go overboard. So the second game from the first round was Nepomniachtchi-Artemiev, and this was also a very interesting game. And the position I want to start talking about is actually this one. This is right after the opening. This was modern Chinese variation in the Ruy Lopez, and it is black to play in this position. It sort of reminds me personally about King's Indian defense, where black bishop on g7 has been traded for white dark square bishop, and usually this trade is considered in black's favor because this bishop on g7 is very often not a good bishop. However, still, white has more space. White is slightly better here. And the question is what to do here next with black. And Artemiev came up here with very interesting idea, which is actually a classical idea of playing right now move queen b8. Queen b8, and as many of you probably know classics, this is the move that Akiba Rubinstein has played in, I don't know who was his opponent, but I think Janowski. I think Janowski. Not sure. I think Janowski, but I'm not entirely sure. Doesn't really matter. Akiba Rubinstein played like in 1900s a game where he played queen b8 from, let's say, d8, queen b8, queen a7, queen c5, and this is what Artemiev does exactly in the exact same disposition. He goes for the same idea. However, I'm not entirely convinced where it's so great right now. And the reason why is, I think, not so great because what does this queen do on c5? It doesn't do really much. And instead, it was better either to play simply b6, try to keep the queen side solid, or play c6 here and try to create some pressure, maybe queen c7, and maybe play b5 at some point, and try to create the pressure on white's center. This would be my probably suggestion. He played queen b8, which is very interesting. That's why I went started from this position, even though not much is going on. But like, it's the first moment where actually you see kind of like shift in the, let's say, what one of the sides is doing. So b3 happened, queen a7, bishop d3, queen c5. Artemiev managed to bring his queen to c5, and right now. I don't think this was such a great idea because, but in general, after queen b2, right now I believe that Nepomniachtchi was just much better. Was just like the idea. Like I don't see what was the next move for Artemiev, because if a4 simply b4, and one may say that okay, if a3, because it was Nepo did, if a4 also b4 works, right? But the thing is that after a3 there is c6 possible, and it's white center is sort of challenged. If we play queen b2 first, c6 right now, rook a c1. If c takes d5, the queen is chased away, and we have we don't need really a free move, so it's just kind of like a waste of tempi, because it actually also weakens the queen side, and instead we can have rook on c1, which is definitely in our favor. So a3 happened, c6. Now d takes c6. It's possible approach, and there is nothing wrong with it. Probably he didn't want to. I mean, like right now queen b2 makes little sense with this connection of a3, so he probably had to switch plans. Rook b1 is also possible with idea b4, but it's not anything like, you know, it's just position. I want to discuss like this in detail because there are many approaches possible. Nepo chose this one, bc, bishop b6, b4, a takes b4, bishop f1, and this is the second measure I want to discuss. Before I suggest move right now for white, I wanted to point out why this queen b8, queen a7, queen c5 was not great. Look what happened. Queen was just chased away from c5 with b4, and right now it's back to c7. It was possible to just play this queen 7 in just one move, right? There was no necessity to go for all of those maneuvers with the queen. It was possible just to play in one move. Even though it's this very, let's say, classic idea and very nice idea, in this position I don't think it was so great. So in this position, white to play, and Nepo played move queen c3, and I don't know, I'm not sure whether it's such a great move. I think the better move was knight g5. If knight g5, I mean after knight g5, the idea could be to play move c5 and then knight takes e6. And this would destroy the pawn structure, black's pawn structure for good. For instance, if we play move like some random move, rook a b8, for instance, is a bad move, but just want to point out the idea. c5, d takes c5, knight takes e6, f takes e6, b takes c5. This is a huge advantage for white. Pawn structure is simply destroyed. Those knights have no good squares. I mean, they have theoretically good square on the d4, but it's impossible to get there, right? So this is knight g5, therefore was a powerful move, because it's hard to prevent this c5 move. If black plays c5 themselves, b5 creates a passed pawn, and the pawn on d6 could be also a weakness. So it's not, I just think that knight g5 was giving Nepo big advantage here. Instead he played queen c3. Queen c3 is also possible, but doesn't really bring much, because of course I understand c5 he wants to play, but after knight d7, it's all covered on e5 on this diagonal. Like there is no really follow-up to this. So he played just rook a d1, f6, making the position solid. Rook d2, trying to play rook e d1 and double and hit on d6 pawn. But again, but right now Artemiev played very strong move c5, and the idea of c5 is to simply, hopefully, of course, for Artemiev, to win the c5 square for the knight. Let's say if rook d1 and take on before knight c5, even if we give the pawn, it would be pretty good position for black. However, in b5 of course happens, and trying to create a passed pawn. But right now this has the knight goes to b6, where also it blockades the b pawn and puts some pressure on the c4 pawn. Rook e d1, and this is next critical position, next important critical position that I want to talk about. Pawn on d6 is hanging, right? And it's impossible to just leave it just like that and the fall. But black has to defend it. But the question is how to do it. And there are simply, as far as I can see, 4 ways to do it. There is rook a d8, there is rook e d8, and there is knight b c8 and knight e c8. Any other move? Okay, there's also knight a4 to hit the queen on a4, on c3, but simply makes no sense because queen will just retreat. And anyway, the problem of the d6 pawn remains. So Artemiev played rook e d8, which is the move I simply don't like. And I believe that if he played knight e c8, his position wouldn't be so bad, because after knight, the thing is, after rook e d8, this is a very passive defense. This rook is sort of forced to right now protect this pawn and cannot find for itself any path to activity. At least this path is elongated comparing to what could have happened if he played knight e8. Knight e8 was a very good move. Of course, right now the idea is also rook a4. It creates also a threat, so white has to defend somehow from this threat, because let's say if h4 or something, then rook a4 simply wins the pawn on c4. So white has to play, for instance, rook c2, queen f7, putting more pressure, bishop e2, for instance, trying to bring this knight to e3, for instance, one of the ideas. But right now, rook e7, as we can see, with the knight protecting this pawn on d6, all the pieces are relegated to different tasks. Right now, this rook e7, rook comes to a7, and black rooks actually create a counterplay on the a file. Queen on f7 is actually also hitting on c4 pawn, which makes the position pawn on c4 kind of like the worry a little bit for white here. So I think this position is maybe still slightly better for white, but it's not anything tragic for Artemiev anymore. Knight f1, as it would be after knight g5 earlier. Let's say this, rook a3, queen e1, rook a4, putting some pressure on c4 pawn. Definitely black has some counterplay here, and especially with the active rooks and on a file, it's not easy for white to improve the position further on. Instead, Artemiev in this position played rook e8, and after rook e8, bishop e2, rook d7 happened, and again the idea knight f1. This is a very nice idea by Nepo, and finally Artemiev realized that he has to finally defend his pawn on d6 with the knight, so he played now knight d8. So what have we achieved with black? Basically, black played rook from e8 to d8, now to d7, and then to a7. Instead, it was possible to also the queen is on c7 now misplaced. Normally it would be ideal on placed on f7, but right now we still have to remove our queen 1, 2, 3 to f7, and then rook only to a7. Black simply wastes so much time piece that right now white can create an attack on the king side, because relegating all black pieces to the queen side is right now a little bit exposed. There is only one bishop on e6 on the king side right now, so in the center, but like let's say covering the king side. So right now after knight e3, queen b8, knight h4, suddenly with idea bishop g4, suddenly it's not easy for Artemiev to defend on the king side. He played move rook a4, trying to put some, let's say, resistance by putting some pressure on c4 pawn, but bishop g4 takes, and we can see that this is like, for instance, comparing to this position. Hold on, which one was it? This position, right? Black actually put pressure with rook a3, right? But in this position, it's white already has played knight h4, has played bishop g4. It's still hitting on, rooks are still on the d file, putting pressure on d6 pawn, and the queen's on b8, not on f7, right? He's on f7, which is more proactive. On the other position, in the other position, the queen's on b8, where it's very passive, like here. Knight h4, rook a4, bishop g4, takes, queen a8, putting some pressure on e4, and in this next critical position, of course, there is possible to play queen c2 with just big advantage. However, Nepo played move g5, which suddenly creates a big mess out of this position, and I believe that this gives good winning chances for white, even though objectively black has chances to equalize. And for instance, right now Artemiev immediately made a big mistake because he took. After knight f5, his king side is basically nearly collapsing. So in the game happened queen takes e4. I mean, this is what happened in the game. But the better move was queen takes e4, in my opinion. After takes, king takes f6, knight f3. We need to protect the knight, and knight c4. And this was the most critical for the entire line. And in this position, white has crazy and stunning, basically, resource. Knight takes e5. I don't know if Nepo saw it, but like I wouldn't be surprised if he has seen it at least. Queen takes e5, of course, knight g4, knight takes e4, and f4. Of course, knight takes e5 is not possible because of rook takes d7. So knight takes e5 is a must. F4. Queen takes f4 right now loses to either rook f2 or rook f1. However, we need to, but basically, this position is of course very dangerous for black. But black is nearly lost here, and there's only one path for black to sort of hold balance, relatively. Still, position remains dangerous, but after this, king g7 is the best move. F takes e5, queen b4 is basically only move. And all of this was like simply crazy, and I think that white still has initiative, but somehow computers hold it at least. For instance, after queen c2, queen e4, and after queen c1 here, queen a3. Basically trying to trade queens by any means, and eventually, you know, trying to escape for a draw. So this was the best defense by Artemiev, but you know, this was rapid game. This move number 36. Probably both players have already like maybe 2-3 minutes. It's not easy to decide. Definitely, queen takes e4. So he took on g5, which is also pretty logical. Like, okay, like sort of course choice I will discuss earlier. F takes g5, knight f5. Prove that you have advantage, right? Prove that you have enough compensation for this piece. So this was also logical, but actually there is more than enough compensation. After king g8, queen g3, white has crushing attack. Queen takes e4 right now, but it's already a little bit too late, because after queen takes g5, king f7, and right now white is simply winning after, for instance, move queen g7. Queen g7 and white is just winning. And of course king e8, queen g8, mate. If king e6, queen h6, and this is very, very important and nice move, queen h6. The idea is that, first of all, if king f7, we just collect the pawn, and we have the same thing, but we collect the pawn, and king f8 is just queen g7, queen g8 mate. And if king f6, let's say queen h6, we got the same position, but we've already, you know, we have collected some material, so it's already better version for us. And if queen takes f5, white wins by playing move f3 and try kicking the queen away, but also threatening g4 mate. I mean, if the queen, let's say, goes somewhere to b7 or a8, of course, g4 mate. So queen has to be given up after queen c4, g4 takes, rook takes g4, and right now king h1. White is simply winning. King is very exposed, and black has two knights which are, let's say, passive. There are some small, very tiny hopes for the fortress or something of that sort, but it is very unlikely with such a weak king, and there is still pawn on b5, and white has, most importantly, still two rooks on the board and the queen, which should give the win, basically. But in this position, king f7, rook d3, this is what Nepo played, and this is also very interesting, because idea is rook f3, right? And seemingly this just should win on the spot. But right now, Artemiev played amazing move, rook a1. And suddenly it's not the win anymore, right? Suddenly it's a draw. Suddenly it's just a draw. Like, white doesn't have anything here more than a draw. So in the game happened rook takes a1, queen takes d3, rook a3, trying to kick the queen out of the let's say king side, because let's say if king g7, king e6, you know, there is black can suddenly win. So rook a3 is already playing for a draw. Queen takes a3, and after knight h6, this is simply perpetual check. King f8, queen g5, it's simply perpetual check. But there is small end to this story, because after queen f5, Artemiev disconnected and forfeited the game, basically. So dramatic end, as is to the best of what I know, what I followed. So I know what were the rules about tiebreak, like kind of like in K, what was the rule about you know, disconnection and so on, but the Nepo's claim was given a victory here, so I guess this was in the rules that in case of disconnection, he wins. But I don't know. Anyway, Nepo won this game by disconnection, sort of, right now. But it was a very interesting one, and there were lots of interesting moments happening, starting basically with this queen b8, queen a7, queen c5, because I just couldn't help myself, and not to mention this Rubinstein's idea, because it's just classic. So All right, let's go to the next one. And this game took quite a lot, so I'm really not sure whether we can finish all the games today from this finals. But anyway, this is the next one. This is Caruana Carlsen again, and this is the second game of this mini match. And Fabiano Caruana was playing this with white, Magnus was playing with black. And seemingly after the opening, black is, just pawn down, like no compensation seemingly, just pawn down, and that's it basically, right? Like just pawn up. While Fabiano's just pawn up, should have great chances of winning. However, it's not so simple. The bishop on e6 is like extremely good blocking piece. It blocks the entire basically king side, and this extra pawn you cannot really feel that there is actually this extra pawn there. You can create easily any passed pawns on the king side, while if we look on the queen side, even though material is even on the queen side, 2 versus 2, if we talk about pawns, the pawn on a4 and connection of pawn on b2 are not such a great combination. They're basically object of the attack in the future by black. So rook c1 happened in the game and rook d3. But in general, I feel like black has easier game. After rook d3, and the idea, what is the idea? The idea is rook b3, also rook a d8, bring the pieces, maybe trade one pair of rooks or something, and then challenge those a4 and b3 and b2 pawns. And it's not so easy to play this position with white. For instance, after rook e3, this is what Fabiano played, which is a good move. However, there was move bishop d2, which is probably a little bit more accurate, and the idea of bishop d2 is to bring this bishop to c3. I'm not entirely sure whether this makes such a big difference, but I would consider this move as an interesting one. And it has small drawback, because after bishop takes, it allows bishop takes h3, right? And normally this is what black should, white wouldn't want black to do. But the thing is that we need to realize that we can't really hold this pawn, and more important is to actually provoke to get this bishop out of a e6 square. Because with this bishop we cannot actually do here anything with white. But after bishop takes h3, takes, rook c3, position is still around equal, but actually we have very good bishop right now. But let's say takes, if takes, white would have very good bishop. Pawn on a5 and would be a potential weakness, not pawn on a4, but pawn on a5 would be a potential weakness. And if we can activate the rook somehow, we could maybe put some pressure as white. And most importantly, pawns are on both sides of the board, queen side and king side, which favors bishop in general. So this could have maybe given some small practical chances for Fabiano. However, of course, there is move bishop d5, which also should be considered, and basically is equalized even easier, because after rook e3, knight takes e5, there is this tactical idea that black has, and the position simplifies very quickly, and it's very likely just a draw. But knight takes e5 is not an easy move to find, so maybe from practical point of view, it would have been better to play bishop d2 there. Now let's say takes, and the bishop takes h6, pawn takes h6, bishop g takes f3, rook takes f3, rook c7, and I think just after rook d8, black should equalize. Black should be well because of the active idea rook d2 coming in. But it's still some game. Maybe there are some practical chances for white, given that. I mean, first of all, both pawns on b7 and a5 are hanging. So if we can somehow, with some, I don't know, trick, make kind of like get a pawn, only one pawn, prevent on f2, especially on the second rank, maybe white can somehow win this. Of course, it's just very hypothetical, and in general, I believe black is doing just okay, and it should be around equal. So this was the best for black, bishop d5. However, Fabiano played rook e3, which is a good move, but I don't think after this move there are any chances to win this with white, because after rook a d8, rook takes d3, rook takes d3, Fabiano played bishop e3, and it is logical move to basically preserve this h3 pawn, because this could have been a threat, right? But I think that it was time to start thinking about the equality and play move rook c5. If rook c, the idea of rook c5 is basically play rook b5 and simply start playing for to simplify the position and make a draw. Because after bishop takes h3, let's say bishop d2, bishop b6, just take on a5, eliminate the pawn on a5, take this, and this is just equal. There is no any reason to worry here with white. Very likely just pretty drawish. So it was the best moment to start thinking about equality. Of course, after rook b5, there is also bishop d2 possible, but there is also a move like rook b5. So I think this was the best and clear way for Fabiano to equalize here, or maybe not to, or at least to secure a draw. But the thing is, I'm pretty sure that he was still thinking about going for a win, because he lost the first game. So he should have looked for chances with white pieces, not with black pieces. So he tried to preserve this pawn, but after rook b3, knight d4, suddenly rook b4, and he actually loses this pawn, and black gets 2 versus 1 on the queen side. And with 2 versus 1 on the queen side, it's very easy to create a passed pawn there, unlike with 4 versus 3 on the queen side, king side for white, especially with this bishop on e6, which basically clinches in a way the entire king side, and it's impossible to do here anything with white. So since this moment, black is just better, and it's not easy position for white to defend, and Magnus won it in a very nice way. Bishop c3, rook takes a4 happened in the game. g4, not a, I mean, it's difficult to suggest a move, to be honest. Like if let's say if f4 or something, of course rook f4, bishop a5, but black can just play h5 and still somehow block the king side. Of course, g4 has this problem that is right now possible to block this king side with g5, which Magnus did, but just in a moment. King g2, b4, bishop d4, b3, rook a2, finally creating the passed pawn, and finally in this moment g5, fixing the pawn structure, and it is very unpleasant position for Fabiano. Maybe with best play it should be somehow a draw, but practically it's very unpleasant to play, because there are two weaknesses. One weakness is, of course, on the queen side, that white piece has to defend and block this b pawn, pass b pawn. And also there are potential weaknesses on the king side, because those pawns are on light squares, and this bishop is so powerful. It basically looks into queen side and the king side at the same time. So after king e3, the game went on like this, and even though it seems like Fabiano managed to get the passed pawn, it is simply irrelevant, because after rook h2, rook a4, I mean, first of all, this pawn is blocked here, and after king g4 is simply tactically Magnus manages to win this pawn. King g2, kicking this rook out, and rook h4, basically just winning this pawn, and it's simply pretty much game over, at least from practical point of view, because even though maybe there are still some chances to defend it, practically it's very hard to do it, because this extra pawn. Also here, very nice move f5. There are all sort of tactical tricks that white has to watch out for, and ideas also bishop f5, rook d3, and so on. All of it makes the position very difficult for white to defend. So here finally, I guess Fabiano blundered this one, and in the end, there's basically Magnus managed to win this. So this will be it for this game. And finally, let's talk about how much time we have. And yeah, there is no way. I mean, I'm going to talk about the most interesting ones, I believe, the resultative ones. So I'm going to talk about right now about the game between Jan Nepomniachtchi and Vladislav Artemiev, from the third one. From this match. So let me just Yeah, actually, let's start from this position. Basically, in this position, this is just beginning. Actually, I can start from beginning here. e4, c5, knight f3, a6, c3, d5, e takes d5, queen takes d5, d4, knight f6. This is all pretty much theory. This is like a lapping sort of with a6, which is considered as good for white. However, the thing is, it's not entirely easy to kind of prove it. Black's position is pretty solid anyway. Black wants to play bishop g4 and maybe knight e6. However, it is in general considered that pawn on a6 is not so needed. Usually, black should play with e6 or maybe bishop g4 immediately without this pawn on a6. So in this position, it makes sense. It makes sense what Nepomniachtchi tried to do, which is move c4. Basically, this move tries to show that this pawn, this kind of like the pawn on a6 is simply not needed there, and that he can take advantage of this sort of extra tempi right now that he has because this pawn on a6 being not needed. However, this is not correct, I believe. Just the best move was to play bishop e2, in my opinion. Just play regular alapin with slightly better position, which definitely would have been, which would have given some advantage. As far as I know, Artemiev has played this game, this position many times. So I feel like maybe Nepo was not sure whether this is so great, especially given so much experience that Artemiev has had in this position. So maybe that's why he decided to play c4, but in general I don't feel like this is the right path, because after queen e4, bishop e2, takes d4, queen takes d4, takes. Right now after e5, black is simply better in my opinion. Pawn on a6 actually is helpful, because with pawn on a7, there will be possible to play knight b5, it will be possible. However, with pawn on a6, knight b5 is not available. So if knight b5 is not available, we have to retreat passively to f3, c2, or b3. None of them really look great for white. And having in mind that black has to play a move, black has played e5 in one move while was waiting for e6, it is definitely a good position for Artemiev here. Knight f3, knight c6, knight c3, and right now, in my opinion, the best move right now was bishop b4. Bishop b4 was by far the best move, and the idea is that if short castle, we want to play bishop takes c3, bc, and bishop f5, for instance. And we can consider playing long castle, and maybe rook f e8, rook h e8, knight e4. Basically, better pawn structure is gives black advantage here. Also, it's possible to play long castle with the idea of bishop d3. It could be also very strong. So I know that this type of structure has been played in Jeffrey's games against Magnus in the Clutch International, and Jeffrey had a great chance of winning. However, this is not the case here. White doesn't have great chances of winning because black has already developed, black has so easy development, and normally this rook should be on b1, putting some pressure. Let's say here, if white rook was on b1, this bishop cannot easily develop from c8, right? But if rook on a1, black can simply develop this bishop and play short long castle with great position. There is no, I think just black is simply better here. So that's the difference. And if bishop d2, trying to maintain the pawn structure after e4, this knight has to go either to g5, which is not great because of bishop f5, h4 simply is also not great, and g1 is awful, obviously. I think that black is simply better here. Instead, he played e4, and this is why I think it was important to play bishop b4 and provoke bishop d2, because it's just much better. Instead, he played e4, and right now knight d2 is available. And I think that this is already around equal, maybe possibly slightly better for in, let's say, long run, because if we can block this bishop with our bishop on e3, we'll see similar position to the one we just discussed in Magnus' game against Fabiano, where he had bishop on e6 and where was pawn on e5. Let's say bishop f5 happened, short castle, knight d4, bishop d1, long castle. It's seemingly all natural moves. But after knight b3, let's say, I think that with the next move bishop e3, white has some chances for advantage here. And this was right now important moment because black was supposed to keep the knights on the board with knight c6. After bishop e3, let's say bishop d6. Position is slightly better for white, but it's not much possible. It's very playable for both sides, and but white has definitely no problems. Unlike white had problems after earlier bishop b4 move. In this position, let's say white can play bishop e2, maybe h3 first, bishop e2, play rook d1, rook c1, maybe knight d4. Which with some play. On the other hand, black can prevent that from happening with bishop e5, maybe doubling on the d file as well. Sometimes could be considered as some h5, h4 also to gain some space on the king side. Pretty much very playable position, lots of life there, and both sides have some chances. But it was important to keep both pieces on the board. Artemiev played bishop e6, after knight takes d4, rook takes d4, b3. Bishop e3 move is actually coming with tempi very often, and this rook will be kicked out. And most importantly, this pawn structure is very solid right now, and while pawn on e4 is potential weakness, because if this rook gets out of there, let's say bishop e7, let's say bishop e3, rook somewhere, bishop c2, pawn e5, e4 can be simply lost. So, or at least will be unpleasant to defend because bishop f5 is, passive defense and so on. So in this position, Artemiev made big mistake, rook d3. I mean, keeping the knights was preferable. In this position, knight c6 was preferable. Bishop e6 was not still so bad, but right now rook d3 was a really bad move. Best move was simply bishop b4. What could be more natural than just developing the bishop, right? After knight e2, rook d7. And I think that here still, even though white's slightly better, Artemiev had, could basically still play it on and equalize eventually. Possibly with perfect play, with good play for black, black should do it without any problems. However, he played rook d3, and after knight a4, b5, knight b2. Position is pretty much right now dangerous because he played b5, but we can't forget that his pieces are still not developed. And we normally, as general rule, suggest that at first you should try to develop pieces and then try to create some threats and get some, create some play. However, here it's sort of like reverse order of this, right? What Artemiev is doing. He played b5 and he plays with the pieces, weakening actually his king also. So it doesn't seem like the right approach. Because that's why possibly I would just suggest playing move. I mean, I don't know, to be honest, because bishop e3 could be unpleasant, then bishop c2, ideas of knight c5 are coming in. It's pretty much unpleasant position already. So he played this. Basically, rook d3 was a mistake. If b5 is what happened, knight b2, and b takes c4. Of course, after knight takes d3, c takes d3, Artemiev would have had a great compensation for this pawn, for this exchange, because this position would be, with both pawns would offer good compensation. Knight d5, bishop b4 or something is pretty good. However, knight takes c4 happened instead. And again, this king is pretty weak. If white is just in time to play bishop e3, bishop e2, rook c1, suddenly this king will be under huge pressure. So only chance for black would be to play bishop takes c4, trying to trade this knight, b takes c4, but this position gives white a pair of bishops. And again, this king is on c8 a little bit weak. So it makes sense to play bishop c5, let's say to block this pawn, but after bishop c2, rook c3, just bishop b3. If rook would have gotten back, it's possible this pawn on e4 would be under pressure. Let's say if I move like rook e1 or bishop g5, both moves would be pretty good, and white is definitely better here. In the game happened rook c3, bishop b3, and rook d3, and bishop c2. They repeated the line, the moves, and of course, I mean, I'm pretty sure that Nepo didn't want to make a draw. He still was playing for a win here. Rook d7 played Artemiev, and I right now, by some reason, Nepo played h3. I'm just wondering why not bishop g5? I was suggesting, right? Bishop g5 looks very natural. He's on bishop on knight on f6. You want to play on e4 pawn. Maybe what black has some compensation connected with knight g4 or stuff, some stuff like that. But like in general, somehow it doesn't feel like that there is enough compensation if you can just take this pawn on e4. So yeah, but he played h3. So and right now, very unfortunate moment for Artemiev, because he played move rook e8, and this is was the final critical position. Right now he could have played almost anything but rook e8, and with decent, let's say not maybe with, let's say, quite okay position. Maybe rook d8 was possible. Maybe even h6 to stop bishop g5 was possible. Almost basically anything, but the move he played, rook e8, because this simply, unfortunately for Artemiev, blunders the exchange on this diagonal, because those rooks are simply, unfortunately, placed right now. Bishop a4, and this is simply game over. And this is how Nepo managed to win this game. Rook e6 takes. The game still went on. And but in general, Nepo managed eventually to win it and convert this extra exchange that he had in this game. So this will be it for this game. I think we have time for one more, but definitely not in detail. Because we are running a little bit out of time right now. So probably I will just cover a little bit from this the second game, because the one we just discussed was the third one, and Nepo managed to win this game. And the third game was basically clinching the match. But the second one, Artemiev Nepomniachtchi, Artemiev White had good chances to win this game. So let's have a look in this position. Last move was h3, changing this bishop. Bishop takes f3, queen takes f3. White has pair of bishops, and seemingly good chances to win the game, because you know, those pawns c3, d4, if they can be activated, they can cause lots of damage. If they are blocked, of course, they'll be weak and put object of the attack. But having a pair of bishops definitely helps in creating some dynamic and active threats to black right now. But in this position, as we know, as I was saying many times, chess is a very dynamic game. We need to talk about dynamics first. So black has one resource that simply equalizes the game nearly immediately, which is e5. In this position, e5 just solves nearly all the problems in the opening. It takes d4 is of course the main threat, and d takes e5 is not possible because knight takes e5, and d5 move causes those pawns to be actually kind of like blocked with queen d6. Let's say b6, then rook c8. Although the pawns, those c and d pawns, white c and d pawns are blocked, and hoping, let's say, if, for instance, c4, maybe rook c8, rook c1, b6, this knight can, first of all, it can stand on a5, hit on c4, but also it can go to b7, c5, where it will be ideally placed on c5 square. And the idea, of course, for black would be, of course, play f5, e4. Black would be just, black has very good perspective to be better in the end. After rook bishop f1, f6, similar thing happens, similar ideas, you know, pretty much the same stuff going on. So I was thinking that maybe rook ac1 could have been played here for white to try to kind of first of all improve the rook, and also if e takes d4, c takes d4, put some pressure on this c file for the black queen. But probably after knight takes d4, queen e4 and queen d7, possibly here black should be just fine. I'm not sure. I would say this. Definitely white has compensation, but I will not be so kind of certain whether there is more than compensation to actually win the game. I'm not sure that this is actually an advantage. I think it's just enough compensation to maintain the equality. However, you know, let's say queen d5 could be interesting, but the thing, sorry, not queen e5, obviously, queen d5, and let's say, but this already trading the queens, and you know, even maybe move like knight e6, trying to give one pawn back, and this should eventually end in a draw somehow. This reminds me of some Grunfeld, where similar positions arise. And let's say, you know, if the white pawn was on e4, and let's say black played, let's say maybe rook a6 and pawn b6, it would be pretty much positions just like from Grunfeld, and Nepomniachtchi is a specialist from Grunfeld, and of Grunfeld, and he would know in here, let's say after bishop takes, he would pretty much know what to do here with black to, you know, secure a draw, or, you know, at least be safe. So this was the best what he could do, but instead he played knight takes d4, which is very tempting. However, I believe this is not so great, because after c takes d4, queen takes c4, bishop takes e7, rook e8, right now rook a d1, and I think Nepo underestimated the potential of this d-pawn, because if this d-pawn gets to d5, d6, it's pretty much game over, right? Like this pawn just supported by this bishop on e7 is just crashing, right? Like it's just a little bit. I don't see how to stop that. Only way to stop that would be to put the queen on d7, but queen on d7 would be very passive, and usually the queen is not such a great blocking piece of a pass pawns. So queen c7, queen a3, very good move. b5 trying to create a counterplay, d5, a5, d6, queen d7. Basically, there was one interesting moment in this game, because in this position, this is the position I want to talk about. Here, Artemiev played rook e1, and this is I believe a mistake, which definitely while he still chances to win it, but big part of the advantage is just blown away, because after queen e6 right now, queen takes e6, pawn takes. Let's say if rook takes e6, rook d8, black has given the pawn, but because of this a-b pawns, it is very likely that those pawns will be traded for these. You know, b4, a4, b3, trade. Rook has to come back, pawn d6 will be gone. It's pretty much around equal. So, and if rook e5, this is what happened in the game, rook c1, rook d1, we got this endgame, and this is Nepomniachtchi managed to comfortably hold. So coming back a little bit to this position, this was the problem here with move rook e1. Instead, if he could have played, for instance, h4, try to provoke some weaknesses. Ideally, play h5. If h5, let's say rook e1. Rook e1 right now is already possible, because after this, in this position, there was rook c1, there was rook d8, right, in this position. Right now, it's not possible because pawn h6 is hanging. Black has to waste time for king f7. And this gives us additional tempo, because right now rook e5 is the same position, but already collected this e5 pawn. So white has huge winning chances here. Still, there are some chances to equalize for black, but in general, white should somehow win this. And as another idea here, it would be queen d5, which is a little bit, let's say, calm idea, and a little bit slow maybe, but also here moves like rook c6, for instance. All of them maintain lots of pressure, and it wouldn't be easy for Nepo to hold this. However, he played this move rook e1, Artemiev, and after this, Nepomniachtchi, without many problems, managed to save this, and went on winning 2.5 to just a half for Artemiev. I don't think we have any more time for discussing the last game, so this will be the last one that we're gonna talk about today. We missed only one game of the last game from the match, mini match between Magnus and Fabiano, which was extremely interesting as well. I wish we had more time to cover all of them, but I wanted to offer as much insight as possible about as many games as possible as well. So I think there were lots of things happening today in those games, and there were some missed chances, some lots of drama, especially with this game Nepomniachtchi-Artemiev, where Artemiev disconnected and forfeited the game. But anyway, I think it was pretty instructive and educational content, and I hope you enjoyed it, and that's all I have for today. So thank you, and see you next time.